You know, I've heard a lot of people say, man, Greg, you so strong, the stuff you've gone through. You know, you've been to prison in solitary confinement. You was on drugs, on crack for 25 years. You was homeless. You know, you was abused severely by your father, tortured, for 16 years. You had trigeminal neuralgia. But, it might seem like I'm strong. And I would say in a lot of ways I might be strong. But I'm gonna tell you, I cried my way through a lot of that mess. When I was in solitary confinement, they first threw me in there. I didn't cry when I went to prison, but when they threw me in solitary confinement, I cried for days. Nobody would have known that. No other prisoner or guard would have known that because you don't show that side of yourself. But I cried my ways through a lot of situations. I remember walking on the street one day in a place in Detroit here called the Cass Corridor, and I was walking. I was on crack then, and I was just crying my eyes out. And at that time, I didn't care who saw it. I was crying my eyes out, and then other situations like being tortured by my father and this nerve disease that I had. Many times I've been in tears, but you know what? At some point, the tears got to stop. At some point, I had to be all cried out because if I had never stopped crying, if I had never stopped crying and I stayed in that space, I would have never become the person that I am now. I would have never moved on. I had to at some point be all cried out. And a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with crying or grieving. I'm talking about crying to the point where you can't move and you can't function, you can't take care of your life and your children, right? At some point, you have to be all cried out and just start taking care of business. It's been many, many, many times that I've been in tears. Even with this narcissist, I was in tears for months. Nobody knew it because most of us know how to wear a mask. But at some point, I became all cried out and I had to pull myself together and move on. And this is for somebody that's going through, I've been through a lot of difficult areas. Two things. The first thing is don't be ashamed or embarrassed to cry. Cry your eyes out if you need to. Cry for days and months and even years if you have to. But at some point, you got to be all cried out and you got to get to the point where you start moving forward in your life. You have to because somebody's dependent on you. Heck, you dependent on you. You don't want to live the rest of your life in depression. You have to, at some point, pull yourself out. And I'm telling you, I understand. I've been in some of the most difficult situations you can ever imagine. And at some point, I had to be all cried out. So I want to encourage somebody today to be all cried out. Be all cried out over that person that left you. Be all cried out. Even if somebody died in your family that you love. I'm not saying don't grieve them anymore. I'm saying be all cried out and go on with your life because you still have a life left to live too.